everybody. So we are very excited today. We are here to talk about the third and fourth episode of season 2 of Star Trek Discovery. They're called Mother and Then An Obol for Charon in this season. And I'm here with my friend Tom to talk about the episodes. And so thanks so much, Tom, for coming on and talking about this.
Hey, it's good to be here.
Episodes were pretty interesting. I was really pretty excited about the first 2 episodes. Would you agree with me that these weren't as good as the first 2?
Yeah. Short answer, yeah. My long answer is more complicated, but
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Well, we'll dive into it. So, yeah, it's I don't know. It's an interesting. They went some interesting ways I wasn't expecting. Let's put it that way, at least.
Mhm.
But yeah. So episode 3, this one is This is basically a Klingon full episode, and we have Laurel and Tyler. That because Tyler is not really Tyler, it's Vok in Tyler's suit, basically.
Kinda, yeah, it's weird.
Yeah. And I don't know. It is weird is the word that I would use. It's very strange, but we have a couple different plot threads going on here, but it starts out with we have Laurel and Tyler, and that basically everybody in the Klingon world kind of is dismissive of Laurel, thinks Laurel can't lead because she's female, that she can't unite the Klingons, and that also because she has this relationship with this human. Think about Laurel, I guess, in this episode.
Well, I actually, looking back, I appreciate what they were trying to do with this episode, because if they want the Klingons and Laurel in particular to continue to be a part of the story, there needs to be a logical world built around her and the decisions that she makes.
Mm-hmm.
And or at least a world that kind of makes sense. One thing I found in my rewatch of season 1 that I found a little odd was that she takes over the Klingon Empire based on holding a gun to the homeworld's head, basically. Like, she says, "I've got a huge explosive. I'm in charge now."
Mm-hmm.
Right, and I can destroy the whole world if you don't let me be in charge. Well, Klingons may respect strength in that way, but you're not exactly going to get a mandate out of that. You know what I mean? That's not exactly. You also kind of need the consent of the governed, right? You need a bit of a coalition to help you. So she kind of starts with none of that, and in this, she figures out a way to get one, right? So I appreciate that they recognized that there was a bit of a problem there, and solved it.
That's true. How does this all sort of gel with the Klingons in canon up until now?
Okay, yeah. I could go on for quite a while about this. As you probably noticed by now, Star Trek fans feel pretty strongly about the Klingons.
Mm-hmm.
And so they kind of start off as like these wily kind of crafty guys with Fu Manchus and sort of dark skin, and they were kind of meant to just represent the Russians, right? Sort of our Cold War adversaries. And later in Next Gen and in the movies, they kind of they develop the idea that they're a warrior culture, right? So that their default position is fight. Sort of the opposite of the shadow of the Federation. So it makes them a good rival. But their aesthetic ends up being like a biker gang, or like they're very hairy and growly and shouty and stuff. And of course, there's the Klingon language, which has been developed into a real thing, and you've got devoted fans who learn it and perform Shakespeare plays in it and the whole thing. All right, so that's just a kind of a thumbnail sketch of where we've
Mm-hmm.
been so far. I feel like what they're trying to do is take all of that, all the things that there are certain aspects of the Klingon uh, persona, I guess, and turn it up. They take some of those sliders and push them even further up. Um, the more the warrior aspect, the more the alienness of them, which on one level I appreciate. Like the look of them is a little bit inconsistent in the sense that, last season we saw them hairless when we're used to seeing them very hairy.
Mm-hmm.
And that put a lot of people off. Also, the makeup was just more detailed. There was more going on with it. Right, so that puts some people off. I think the other side of that coin, which I think is working out well in this season, is that we're getting them in such a way that they're still really alien, and it's still really off-putting.
Mm-hmm.
I think there was a serpentine quality to them when they were hairless that I liked and didn't. I'd never seen that quality in Klingon culture before, where they were kind of like snakes. And which I can dig it, because in the original series Klingons, which are my favorite, the crafty guys, right, the schemers, who would look for any advantage they could get. We've got that. We have that in this season, and they're not always just banging on about honor. They have plans, right, and they conspire against each other, and that strikes me as being really consistent with canon. Like you say, everything is just turned up higher because we can get more violent. We can have more elaborate, fight scenes, which I enjoyed the fisticuffs in this one. And the stylized violence and stuff was really cool to me. I had a good time watching all that. And I'm really they're slowly seducing me into loving these Klingons. Like, I'm loving how just unbelievably ruthless they are compared to humans, and how they just don't hesitate, and also just the fact that the craftiness is coming back. That some of those things that I like about those old original series Klingons is back, and that's fun to see.
Very, very interesting. So in the Vulture recap, it's Devin Maloney's the author's name. He says, kind of interesting in his recap. He says, not yet in all this time, not a single Klingon, not one mentions the word honor. Honor is literally all Klingons ever talk about. How many times did the Enterprise crew go out of its way so Worf could fight somebody in order to defend his honor? And then he gives some examples. And it talks about that some different examples, and he says without question the most casually un-Klingon string of decisions I've ever seen a Klingon make on a Star Trek show, including marrying a Trill. L'Rell could have campaigned on that alone and won the other house's loyalty. It's. What do you think about that? Do you think that they've? Do you see that with honor?
I think a lot of fans are dramatically overestimating Klingon ethics.
Okay.
For one thing, one of the reasons that Worf was such an interesting character is that he was so very ethical, but he was a guy who made himself more Klingon than Klingon, right? He was super Klingon. He was aggressively Klingon. But here's the thing about Worf. He was raised by human beings in the Federation.
Oh, okay.
And yeah, he may have and so he brings a different perspective to Klingon honor and ethics that ends up being in conflict with the Klingon people he encounters in his career. Because he finds when he goes to Kronos, he finds people who are willing to accept a lie in order to maintain power. Right? Because the right people are involved, right? And it turns out Klingon honor isn't what he thought. And he still is a believer in Klingon honor, but it's a Klingon honor that really, he's not self-aware of this, but it's a Klingon honor of his devising. We've got to stop judging these Klingons by Worf's ethics. Okay, stop it. Because these are not worse Klingons. Okay,
Mhm.
this is 100 years before that. This is in a completely different time period. And we're talking about, like I said, you don't want to be looking at next gen Klingons for comparison here. You want to be looking at TOS Klingons for comparison.
Mhm. Okay, interesting. All right, very cool. So then we find out that that Laurel has this baby that she had with Vok, and it's like a test tube baby, kind of, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
raised or grown outside her uterus. Yeah.
Yes. And so Laurel tells Cole, I think, that he needs to remove the paint from his face. What was all of that about? I was a little confused about that. That he has like surveillance paint, like something like
Yeah.
that on his face.
Yeah. So apparently, the House of Kor is really into having paint on their face,
Mm-hmm.
and since they are an honor culture, there's that word again. Um, Tyler Vaughn understood that in order to really insult this guy from the House of Kor, I don't remember his name now, Cole or
Yeah.
something like that,
Yeah.
or Cole's father, I guess. He needed to get in his face and take and smear the paint off of it.
Mm-hmm.
And right, as just an act of like, sort of like when people used to challenge each other to duels and they like slap each other with a glove or whatever. Like, I think that's kind of what that gesture meant. But again, we've got the crafty Klingons here because that was the paint itself was full of nanotech that was a listening device.
Yeah. 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 And so you also have Tyler talking to Burnham. He's able uh, to beam higher over to her and get some advice about what she should do. I mean, what he should do.
Mm-hmm.
And did that surprise you at all, or what did you think of that whole conversation?
I mean, it sort of made sense. I felt like they needed to reconnect a little bit
Mm-hmm.
because they were obviously special to each other in last season, and so we needed to they didn't want to just leave that hanging. I think they want to do more with that. I guess we'll see where they go with it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But it also
So,
obviously compromises Tyler, and it makes him suspect in the eyes of um, the people Laurel is sort of courting to become her coalition and her supporters.
mm-hmm. Yeah. So they end up getting Laurel and Tyler end up getting captured, and she's kind of manipulated to sign over her chancellorship. There's a tablet, kind of it looked like an iPad kind of thing, and she
Mm-hmm.
ends up
Yeah.
pressing it. And then we get the return of Captain Giorgio
Mm-hmm.
on here, and she's working temporarily, kind of, with the Federation. And this is, of course, like evil. It's Giorgio. This is the Emperor Giorgio
Yeah.
version. Um, and there it's the idea of she's kind of working with it's like a Suicide Squad kind of a thing. We're going to work with the bad guys because they can get us information, kind of a sort of a thing going on. And what did you think about Giorgio?
I guess we'll kind of see what they do with her. It's I think first of all, it's fun to see. Her name escapes me now. The actress,
Michelle Yeoh.
Michelle Yeoh. Yes, it's really fun to see her play in anything because I haven't seen a ton of her work, but what I've seen, I've liked. Like, there's just nothing of hers I haven't liked.
Mm-hmm.
So she's just fun to watch, and yeah, it's interesting that they're bringing Section 31 in. That's something that kind of comes from Deep Space Nine, and it's sort of been worked into canon with Enterprise as well. And it's basically the Federation's spy agency that tends to work outside the typical ethical guidelines of the Federation.
Mm. Yeah, it's like a spy thing, right? It's how they can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so the basic idea is that when it comes to the security of the Federation, the ends justify the means, and that's that, right? In those other shows, they would recruit they would try to recruit our regular heroes into helping them because of some special skill or other that they had. And now it looks like we've got a regular who isn't bound by Federation ethics and is actually pretty eager to kick butt and take names just for the fun of it, let alone, national security. She doesn't care.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
She's just there for a good time.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, we have this whole sort of plot of that the Klingons would never accept a woman, and especially with a human torchbearer, they call it. Do you think that the feminism, now we have Klingon feminism, we'll also talk about Tilly, their sort of feminism arc in this episode. Do you think they laid it on too thick?
No, I don't think so. I mean, there are some interesting, I don't know. I didn't feel like that I was getting messaged to death or anything with it. It didn't bother me.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay. And so basically, Giorgio kind of saves them for her own kind of use, I guess, and they end up taking they end up claiming that Tyler and the baby are dead, but they're really not. They basically take the baby to like a monastery kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then they I forget where they send Tyler at the end. I can't remember, but anyway, the Rel's able to kind of claim that, look how true to the Klingons I am, because I gave my own baby. I was gave up for you, and so she wants to be called a new title, be called Mother. And then basically, then Tyler gets this job in Section 31. So that's kind of the plot there. I don't know. It was just a little, I guess, because I don't have a whole lot of experience with Klingons. The whole thing, I don't know, just felt kind of weird to me. It was just like, it just wasn't pleasant.
It was a real tonal shift from what we've seen so far this season. I'll grant you that. And that's why I'm kind of going, yeah, maybe these weren't so hot because the tonal shift was so drastic.
Yeah, I don't know. It was just like, it was just so weird to me. But yeah, it now that we talk it over, it's one of those things. Maybe I like it a little bit more. But while I was watching it, I was just kind of like, ugh, I didn't like it. But
yeah, I find that with our conversations, typically that I like it better after we've talked about it. So
yeah, that's interesting.
I go through the same thing.
Yeah. Well, so we also have Tilly as this sort of B plot going on. They did have a lot going on in this episode, and one of the things one of the critiques or whatever that I listened to, he was saying that in a classic Star Trek, you just had a major A plot, and then you had a smaller B plot, which is classic television. And here they definitely, at the very least, have sort of an A, B, and C plot. Do you think it gets a little muddled, a little convoluted?
Yeah, there's a load going on. Even the good one of these two, right? They're the one that is a little bit more consistent with the tone. There's still a bit of like, whoa, there is so much going on here.
Yeah,
they pack a lot in.
So you have Tilly. She's in this command training program. It was a little cheesy, I think, at the beginning, because she's running a half marathon, and she doesn't look like the greatest athlete in the world, Tilly, but somehow she stops and has this whole conversation with this spirit that we'll talk about. But she still, despite doing that, she still wins, and not only wins the half marathon, she sets a course record. That's kind of like, probably not.
But, yeah, I've heard whispers in the fan community that she's kind of a Wesley. You know who I'm talking about?
Wesley Crusher?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Wesley's kind of this teenager for those that don't know, Wesley's this teenage character on Star Trek The Next Generation. He was kind of a Mary Sue character, and I'm not being derisive about that. he was kind of a Mary Sue character for Gene Roddenberry because he shared Gene Roddenberry's middle name.
Uh-huh.
Right. So it was Gene Roddenberry trying to insert himself on the show, kind of. And of course, he's a genius, right?
Yeah.
And for a few seasons there, it started to feel like every other episode was Wesley saving everybody in spite of being a teenager.
Yeah.
Right. So he was seen as kind of obnoxious. Now, as you know, at 7 and 8, I absolutely loved Wesley because I wanted my avatar to be on the show, right?
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to be on the show. I wanted to be in that world. So I had no problem with him when I was a kid. But anyway, that sort of sets the table for now. It kind of looks like, oh, look, Sylvia Tilly is brilliant and a teenager, and that's interesting,
Yeah, I mean, I think it does make the show maybe feel a little bit heavy-handed in the feminism too, when you have kind of all of these perfect characters who, Burnham doesn't really make very many mistakes aside from her original, mutiny, but that was all for these good causes. And then you have Tilly, who is setting course records, and then you've got Laurel, who is, and there could be a little bit more nuance to some of these female characters.
I don't know. I feel like there's plenty of nuance.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the thing, though, too. You have to understand, when it comes to sexism, Star Trek has some dues to pay.
Uh-huh.
Right? Yes, they had the first female lead with Janeway. Great, good job. But they also have had some really problematic things. Next Gen did not treat its female characters all that well. Of the two, one of them was always in the background, and she was Wesley's mom. That was mainly how she was known. The other one was always a rape victim. Like she had almost nothing to do, and when she did have something to do, it was usually because she was a rape victim, either psychically or somehow or another. Right? It was not good. It was not good at all.
But I think
some female leads that, like I said, they've got some dues to pay.
Interesting. I mean, I think that Uhura she was a character. I mean, I haven't watched every single episode, but I watched most of original series, and I feel like she was a groundbreaking character without necessarily kind of meaning to kind of be groundbreaking, if that makes sense. Like, she had her role, and she was just sometimes that makes it more groundbreaking if you can have a female character that's just like everybody else. He gets the same treatment like everybody else. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah, okay, I could see that. The thing about that is that she didn't really get the same treatment as everybody else. I mean, she got about the same treatment as Uhura and Chekhov, in the sense that there was never really an episode about her. Like, we never really got one. She kind of was just answered the phone in the background. There wasn't a lot to her in that early show. But yeah, I mean, one thing I've always liked about the way Star Trek does the diversity thing is that they just say, here it is, and it's a thing, and they're not necessarily preaching at you about it. And like, well, say thank goodness this is better than the old days when you don't get that speech.
Right.
The only time with Captain Janeway and Voyager, the only time anybody ever brought up gender was because they ran into some sexist alien who didn't want to deal with a woman, right? But on the ship, it was just like, yeah. So like no one thought twice about it.
Right. Interesting. Yeah. It's an interesting thing to think about. So anyway, back to, so we have Tilly. She is seeing the ghost of her friend May. Now, this is a friend she had from junior high school. Wouldn't she see May as a younger child, if that's how she knew her? Was that odd to you at all?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, yeah, that is weird. But I mean, it's alien jiggery pokery too. It's like it's an alien's messing with her mind, and she wouldn't listen to. On one level, you're right, but on another level, she wouldn't listen to a teenager or her teenage friend. She wouldn't, like, at first, Tilly just accepts May's presence in her life. It's just like, oh, hi, crewman number 2, whoever you are, like, oh, that's a good idea, crewman. Like, she's just seeing this woman in a Starfleet uniform, and And then it's when she uses an old familiar nickname that she goes, "Wait, May? Like, is that you?" And then she looks, and that's when she looks her up and realizes that she's been talking to a dead woman.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there's quite a number of incidents. Like, if she's training for this command program, and she ends up basically like chewing out the captain, and and she's yelling at this being that none of them can see, and all this stuff going on. Uh, what did you think about all of that? That was pretty intense.
Oh yeah, I mean, I felt bad for her, but something that occurs to me that's also really cool about that is that even if there was a mental health issue, she gets treated and she's okay. Like, it's treated like any other health issue. It
Mm.
doesn't, like, oh boy, that's a nice future I'd like to think about. A future where mental health doesn't carry the stigma that it does now.
Yeah, that's a good point. I thought of that. That's true. Uh, so do you think that, so we've had scenes with Stamets seeing Culber having these
Hmm.
visions. Do you think that's the same kind of thing going on here? Or is it
Yeah,
different?
it's possible because he's having a conversation with someone in that, he had Colbert prompting him at the end of season 1 saying, "Find the path in the forest," right? He's trying to look at infinite paths through the mycelial network to get home. And somebody, Colbert, prompts him and to pick the right one.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's like, yeah, so is he talking to the other side, or was he talking to an alien who was taking on a form that was familiar?
Well, and doesn't Tilly know about these sort of visions that uh that doesn't Tilly know about these visions that Stamets has been having? So I would think she would go directly to talk to him about it when she starts seeing, but she kind of keeps it to herself
I
because she
don't think she
doesn't.
does. Or no, I don't think she does know about it because Stamets has been very moody about tapping into the network in the first place, right? I remember that in
Mm-hmm.
the prior episode, he leaves and she's like, "What's wrong?" He's like, "I don't want to talk about it."
But isn't the whole reason that she has the infestation is because she was trying to save Stamets from the
Well, no, like a spore landed on her shoulder at the end of season 1, and I happen to
Mhm.
remember that. Thinking, oh, they're setting something up there, and this is what they're setting up. But I don't
Okay.
think it has to do with. No, I don't think Stamets has been forthcoming with her about how he managed to do what he did.
That is between we get Burnham ends up her mother ends up coming on the ship, Amanda, her name,
Hmm.
and she wants help to try to get Spock's medical records, but Captain Pike doesn't want to allow it because he needs permission to make this request.
Uh-huh.
And basically, we find out that Spock has murdered 3 of his doctors and escaped. And how do you feel about this? I mean, I feel like they are setting up Spock as this person who has all of these feelings and is really conflicted and everything. Whereas I feel like in the other shows, then the other things I've seen Spock, he's very guarded with his feelings. He doesn't even really have very many feelings. Does this feel like a Spock that you know and love? Do you feel like they're hurting Spock as far as a character? What do you feel?
Not necessarily. I think that I'm kind of waiting to see because we haven't
Mm,
seen Spock yet.
right.
We don't know if Spock has actually done any of these things yet. In fact, some of the characters even say that doesn't sound like Spock, right?
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't sound like the Spock we know. In fact, I think that's a conversation that Pike and Number One have in the next episode. Um, they're like, that doesn't sound right, does it? Right? No,
Right.
add up. Yeah, Spock killing is one thing. Spock being emotional, no, that's not completely foreign to the character at all.
Mm-hmm.
Um, because we've seen and we've seen Spock. Spock has his reasons for things, and uh, he uses his logic and his emotions in ways that suit him. But his aims are always the best. Like That's one thing that's consistent about Spock is he's a hero, right? His intentions are always as excellent as possible. Even if he may make an error, although that's rare, he's usually spot on. But his actions may seem perplexing to the people around him, either because he's completely unemotional or he's too emotional for a Vulcan. But it always adds up to something important or something good, right? So in the Next Generation, Spock is an ambassador, and he runs off to Romulus. And people, Starfleet is worried. Is he defecting? Holy crap! He's running off to hang out with our enemies. What's going on, right? And turns out he's trying to make peace.
Mm.
And he's having to do it without permission, because Starfleet and the Federation weren't going to give him permission to run off to Romulus and help an underground to flourish, and try to make peace. So he's like, "Well, screw it. I'm just going to do it."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but he's a very logical character. Right now, at least, we are seeing all of these things that are supposedly done out of kind of rage or out of these feelings as opposed to logic. But are you assuming that they're going to kind of provide that at a later date, some of that logic?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I assume that they will. And the thing is, too, that we've seen Spock rage before. And in fact, there have been occasions when Kirk has tried to tap into Spock's anger for a particular reason. So the anger's there, and the feelings are there. It's just a question of how he deals with them. And he's going to be a little bit left of your average Vulcan as far as his emotional control. And that's one of the things that sort of torments him, is that he's got this human half warring with him. Yes, he tries to be, like Worf, he's trying to be more Vulcan than Vulcan. He's trying to be super Vulcan. And his human half is conflicting with that.
Interesting. What do you think of this whole Red Angel thing?
It's cool. I see it right now as just a mystery and an interesting way to address belief and religion and interpreting different things and also questioning your own beliefs, which I think is kind of neat. So
cool. All right. Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens. So let's move on to episode 4. This is An Obol for Charon. And so we find out that that we get introduced to number 1, played by Rebecca Romaine. Is this a character that you've seen before?
Yeah, if you watch the original, if you watch either The Cage, the original pilot, or the Menagerie Part 1 and 2, you see Pike's first officer on the Enterprise is a dark-haired woman referred to as number 1. And in that series, she was actually played by Majel Barrett, who became later Majel Barrett Roddenberry. She married Gene Roddenberry. And she's kind of Star Trek's founding mother, if it has one, in the sense that she was there from the beginning. She married Gene Roddenberry, and she actually played the computer voice in all the series through Enterprise. Also played like Nurse Chapel and Loaxana Troi, who was Counselor Troy's mom. And I mean, yeah, she's just been all over the place in Star Trek, that actress. But that character is kind of unexplored, right? It's kind of cool that right off the bat in 1966, there was a female first officer. Here's the thing, why they changed that? Because the ladies in the focus group said, well, who does she think she is?
Interesting.
Bossing people around and being the first officer.
So they responded negatively to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's interesting. Huh.
Yeah. So from the Star Trek's very earliest history, they were trying to give, to some extent, they were trying to give women this, elevate women in this future and portray them as being just as capable of leadership as men. But it was sort of, the world wasn't ready.
That's interesting.
So,
yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
So
I geeked out. Yeah. So the ship, they start tracking Spock's warp signature. There's this. They've been tracking all these 7 different lights, 7 different planets, and there's one. So it's this giant sphere that is a crystalline entity, and it's basically the idea is it's a super ancient molten rock that is alive. That's actually has like, and it kind of reminded me a little bit of the Genesis planet in Star Trek 3. Kind of reminded me a little bit of that a little bit. So then we find out, so basically this giant molten rock, this giant planet ends up infecting the universal translator. What did you think about all that? How all that happened?
That was good fun. It was kind of cool because we've never seen a glitch like that on any show, where everybody's, you just screw with a little bit with the computer and suddenly no one can understand each other. And also kind of a fun retcon because that prompted Pike to, because let me tell you a little bit about the turbo lifts, all right? Because you'll mention someone says in passing, oh, if we can't understand each other without the universal translator, we can't even run the turbo lift. Well, here's the interesting thing about the turbo lift. In the original series, they didn't operate the turbo lifts by voice. They're operated with a handle that you grab. So later, Pike becomes a fleet captain, like a commodore, and he has a say as to how all the ships operate. Having had this experience, don't you think it might cross his mind to replace the voice activation in the turbo lifts with like a handle?
Right.
So, and we also sort of get in passing where Pike's like, I've had it with the holograms no more holograms on the Enterprise. We're just going straight to good old view screens. It's fine. So we're kind of retconning a little bit, right? So the differences.
Interesting. Yeah, and so basically it's also interesting, this whole episode was kind of it was kind of Saru's moment to shine, I guess, for lack of a better reason. So we find out, that he knows 94 languages, and so he's the one that's able to kind of pull things together with all of this, with the translator being down. And but he's not feeling well, and so that's kind of becomes one of our other plot lines through the episode. And so basically the reason why the universal translator and there's this UV light that the sphere is putting out, this is their attempt to communicate with the Discovery, and that these screaming about their legacy, that they want to be remembered. And we find out that there's sort of, they call it it's their galaxy's Dead Sea Scrolls, that the sphere that has 1,000 years of detailed information from the sphere of what's happened.
100,000 years.
Oh, 100,000. Okay. And so that was all pretty interesting. The idea of sort of, it also kind of reminded me a little bit of like Ego and his plan in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. It reminded me a little bit of that. But anyway, it was interesting. And they find out that there's this relationship between using the mycelial drive and this planet, and that whenever they use it, they impact this whole region more than they thought.
Well, see, this is what's confusing. I don't think the entity that took over Tilly and poses her old best friend from school, that is different and apart from this being they encounter that messes with their translator.
Oh, is it? Okay. Maybe I got confused.
Yeah. See, this is where, they may be trying to do a little too much in these episodes. Like,
so this is not part of the mycelial network?
No, this has nothing to do with that. They just got sucked out of, they got interdicted in their path. They got pulled out of warp by this thing. And it has nothing to do with the spore drive. It's just a thing that's out there. and it's dying, and it's trying to pass on its legacy.
Oh, see, for some reason I thought that they were part of the reason why it was dying.
No, it's just an old thing that was
Oh, okay.
dying. Yeah, they didn't kill
Oh,
it. It just stopped them. It was trying to pass on what it knew.
okay. But yeah, so basically the information that the sphere is giving them is kind of like the Dead Sea Scrolls,
Yeah.
which allowed them to be able to interpret hieroglyphics and other ancient languages when they found it. It's kind of similar to with this, that they're able to, because of Saru, he knows all these languages, and because of the things that the 100,000, I guess, amount of information. Also, that he included in all of that information is tracking for Spock. So they they're able to get closer to finding where he they get the coordinates for where he was last seen, I guess, or where he is. So that's that. So that's all pretty interesting. And then we also get this plot where, continuing on with Tilly, so she is still dealing with this mycelial alien, and they decide to drill a hole in her head so that this creature can speak. And that's when we find out that the spore drive jumping has destroyed portions of the mycelial network, and that these organisms are angry and want to get even or upset.
Yeah, and I don't know if you like David Bowie at all or not, but
Yeah.
that my heart glowed in that scene. I loved that. That was
Yeah.
really great.
Yeah, that was really fun. She sings Starman when
It was actually Space Oddity, but yeah, it was
yeah.
kind of cool to see that David Bowie's work lived on.
Yeah, that was fun. And so yeah, basically then Stamets in Reno, which was nice to see her again.
Yeah.
They're able to get her free from this organism that's like this giant blob at this point. But then she ends up getting kind of sucked back in, and that's kind of left there. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens with all of that. So then another storyline we have going on here is Saru is not feeling well, and he turns out he has this thing called Vihari, which is this illness his people have that like prepares them for when they're going to die.
Mm-hmm.
And he has these ganglia that kind of sense death, and so then which they've been in some pretty tense situations, so I'm surprised this hasn't come up before.
Sure, it has.
But
Yeah, it has.
it
Yeah, it has.
has
Oh, yeah, they talked
for
about it a lot
Saru.
in season one. Yeah. In fact, when Michael Burnham comes on board the ship, his threat ganglia extend because at that point he hates
Uh-huh.
her. Because she
Oh, so
killed his
no.
captain and so on. No, they did all
Oh.
that in season one. Yeah, that's been well established.
Oh, sorry. I must have missed that. But
It's okay.
anyway, and so yeah, so he's really sick, and he thinks he's going to die, and he has Burnham cut his ganglia. And the surprising thing is that when she does that, he actually doesn't die, but is healed by it.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and evidently this whole Vihari thing is something that was brainwashed uh, for the Kelpians when they were enslaved. And it's kind of just kept on through all these generations. And
Mm-hmm.
so I don't know, what did you think of all of this whole scene?
Now that was really interesting. Honestly, though, what I have a bit of a problem with is that I almost feel like one of the short treks is required viewing in order to really fully understand what's going on here.
Uh-huh.
So did you see any of those short treks? The little 15-minute episodes?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Oh, so have you see? You remember the one with Saru in it? Like it's
Uh-huh.
all about Saru and his backstory. I feel like this
Yeah.
episode leans a lot on that backstory, um,
Okay. Yeah.
and that if you don't understand that, you may not follow. I don't know. Maybe someone who hasn't seen it can correct me, um,
Uh-huh.
but yeah, I mean, I like that a lot. But I and it is interesting to see that. Oh, Saru can't just turn his back on his people now. Now he has a reason to go home. So, they're opening more possibilities for conflict and interest, and I bet, here's what I think is going to happen. He's going to go home. He's going to try to convince his people that they don't have to keep doing this. They don't have to keep sacrificing themselves. In the process, he's going to run into his sister, a woman
Oh.
he's assumed he's never going to see again.
Uh-huh.
And it's going to get interesting, right? It's going to get complicated, which that's what you want from a story. So
Yeah. Yeah. That would be. I thought Doug Jones was great in this. I thought you really felt. I mean, it felt pretty emotional. Like I mean, there was a second where I started to think, is he getting written off the show? Like it was pretty
right, yeah, they
convincing,
had
I
me
think.
going. Yeah,
Yeah.
they had me going.
I think he did a good job because, I mean, I could believe that for whatever reason he needs to be off the show, and so he's gonna it's more believable that a character like him could be killed versus obviously like Burnham's not going to be killed. There's certain. It's kind of like when in Doctor Who when the Doctor is threatened. You're never really that worried about her or
Yeah,
him
yeah,
because it's the Doctor, obviously. But if it's a side character like this, then it's a little more believable. And so it's, I don't know. I just thought it was a pretty compelling scene. Probably my favorite of anything that either of these two episodes.
no, yeah, and it was kind of sweet to see that tender moment between the two of them where Michael is usually so composed just loses it. She just can't believe that he's
Yeah.
really gonna die. She just can't handle it. Like I liked
Hmm.
seeing that crack in her veneer a little.
Hmm. Yeah. So there we go. That's basically the two episodes. And yeah, I think my favorite was the An Obol of Charon. The mother one was just a little weird to me. I don't know. I I
Yeah,
didn't
here's
like
the
it
thing about that
that
episode.
much.
As on further review, like as I'm sort of thinking about it, I'm realizing that I had some English classes when I have an English degree. I had some
Uh-huh.
classes where we would have had a field day with this episode because
Uh-huh.
we talked a lot about feminism and femininity and domesticity versus public life and that kind of thing.
Uh-huh.
Well, here what we see with Thorell is her giving up her swearing off domesticity. Her
Yeah.
lover and her child are heads in her hands, right? That's it. So in order
Yeah.
to be the chancellor of the Klingon Empire, she has to completely forswear any domestic life or future whatsoever. And there's an
Right.
interesting parallel there because what you often find with powerful women is that at some point they had to kind of make a decision between their family and their work. And
Mm-hmm.
and many women still find that they're there. Like they're either going to become Hillary Clinton or they're going to be mom.
Yeah.
And they
Yeah, it's
they can
true.
do both.
And even if you do try to swear off, you're still seen as either the beauty queen or the bitch, one or the
Yeah,
other.
yeah.
It's very hard to be taken kind of seriously. You're either Sarah Palin or you're Hillary Clinton, one or the other.
Uh-huh.
um and so yeah, it's interesting. And not only is she having to be masculine, but her swearing off of her baby is what makes her have that Klingon honor, it gives her more validity for her ruling
Yeah,
than
and
she
suddenly
would
she's
other.
legitimate. Yeah.
Yeah, like you really sacrifice this. So it will be interesting to see where it all goes in the next two episodes. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's always really fun to take these notes, and it's always really fun to talk it out. And And I always end up appreciating it more after hearing your point of view. It's really cool.
Yeah, likewise.
So yeah. So where can people find you on online and follow you on social media and all that fun stuff?
On Twitter at Elmano Roboto, on Instagram at Tom Gun Poet, and yeah.
Great. And you can find me at Rachel's Reviews on iTunes and YouTube. If you can put in your ratings and reviews on iTunes, if you're listening on there, we really appreciate it. And if you're listening on YouTube, just give us a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel, and that would be great. And yeah, thanks so much. And we will talk again in 2 weeks.
Thanks, Rachel. Look forward to it.
Okay. Bye.
Bye now.